All right, let's dive in. Today we're talking about Bitcoin and the traditional money we all use, and a really surprising connection between the two that I bet you've never thought about. We're going to challenge a very common assumption about how this whole thing works. So here's the big question we're tackling today. Is Bitcoin truly its own little island, completely separate from the rest of the global financial system? It's a pretty fundamental question for anyone interested in crypto. For a long time, the prevailing theory was basically yes. The idea was that Bitcoin's price just does its own thing, totally disconnected from the ups and downs of currencies like the euro or the dollar. But what if that whole idea is, well, wrong? In 2021, an academic study decided to really put this island theory under the microscope. And honestly, what they found could change the whole map of how we think about crypto. So how'd they do it? Well, the researchers set up a kind of financial showdown. Bitcoin versus 6 of the world's most important currencies. And they were really specific about which ones they chose. Yeah, they didn't just pick these out of a hat. They split them into two very distinct groups. In one corner, you've got the giants from developed economies, the euro, the British pound, and the Japanese yen. And in the other, you have the heavyweights from emerging economies, the Chinese Yuan, the Indian Rupee, and the Russian ruble. And trust me, that distinction is the key to this whole story. Now, their goal wasn't just to see if prices kind of move together sometimes. They were looking for something much deeper, what they called a causal nexus. It sounds fancy, but all it means is a real, provable link where a change in a regular currency can be shown to directly cause a change in Bitcoin's price. So, the moment of truth. What did they actually find? Well, at first, the results seemed to confirm what pretty much everyone already thought. The whole Bitcoin is an island theory looked totally solid. But then, the data took a really sharp, unexpected turn. For that first group, the currencies from developed economies, the study found nothing. Zilch. No meaningful causal connection. So far, so good for the island theory, right? It seemed to hold up for the euro, the pound, and the yen. But that's exactly where the predictable part of the story ends. When the researchers looked at the data from two of the world's biggest emerging economies, a whole different picture started to form. And this is the bombshell finding. The study found a strong one-way causal link running from the Chinese yuan and the Indian rupee to Bitcoin. Let me say that again because it's important. Changes in those two currencies could directly impact Bitcoin's price. But, and this is crucial, it didn't work the other way around. So we know what the connection is, but that just leads to the next big question, right? When does it matter? Is this influence happening all the time, or does it only kick in under certain circumstances? And that gets us to the why behind all this data. Because as it turns out, this connection doesn't just hum along in the background. It gets dialed up to 11 under very specific and very stressful market conditions. The researchers called these periods contractionary regimes. Put simply, these are just bear markets or downturns. Those times when markets are trending down, things are shaky, and investors are getting nervous. And here is the absolute key, pulled right from the study. During these downturns, when the yuan and rupee actually gain value, it positively and strongly affects the value of Bitcoin. Think about that. The market stress itself is the trigger that makes this hidden connection suddenly become powerful. Okay, but why China and India? The study points to a few things, but China's absolutely massive role in the crypto ecosystem is a major piece of this puzzle. Let's just start with a number that is kind of staggering. At the time of the study, mining pools managed out of China controlled a whopping 74% of the entire Bitcoin network's hash power. That's an incredible amount of control over Bitcoin's core infrastructure. And it's not just mining. China has also been a huge driver of trading volume on major exchanges. And on top of that, Bitcoin became a tool for getting around the country's strict capital controls. One report estimated that over $50 billion in crypto was moved out of China in 2019 alone. You can even see this unique dynamic at play when the study compared two recent global crises. Take a look at this. The study found something that feels a little counterintuitive. The crisis regime caused by the global pandemic in 2020 was actually shorter for crypto than the crypto-specific bear market of 2018. This suggests that sometimes the internal dynamics of the crypto world can be even more impactful than massive global events. So let's wrap this all up. What's the big takeaway from all this research? Why does this connection matter to you? Well, it pretty much flips that old narrative right on its head. The myth was that Bitcoin is this isolated financial island. The reality, at least according to this data, is that Bitcoin is actually deeply anchored to the economies of two of the world's most important emerging markets. So here's what it means in practice. First, what happens in the economies of China and India can directly influence Bitcoin's price, and that effect gets way stronger when markets are shaky. And second, for anyone trying to build a diversified portfolio, realizing that Bitcoin is not a completely isolated asset, that is absolutely essential for managing risk. So in the end, it turns out Bitcoin isn't an island. It's more like a whole new continent with deep economic connections back to the old world that we're only just now starting to really map out and understand. And that leaves us with one last fascinating question. As emerging economies like China and India keep growing and gaining influence on the global stage, are their currencies and their policies ultimately going to be the forces that define Bitcoin's future? Something to think about.